Thank you all for sticking with us. I appreciate you spending some time with me today. We're going to be talking about semantics. And I thought I'd start with talking about, well, what does semantics actually mean on a day-to-day basis? Because we're going to start about eventually what semantics means when we talk about business and solving problems, things like that, and how it relates to knowledge graphs. And just to provide some context and to make things maybe a little simpler to understand, I thought I'd start with two examples of semantic challenges that we deal on a day-to-day basis. I think one of them you've all heard before, and I'm going to ask for a little audience participation, get you all thinking a little bit. The first one is the word love. How many different use cases or semantic interpretations of the word love can you think of? And I'll get started, and I'll ask if you guys can think of some other ones. So I love my wife. I love my children. I love my family. Now we can start getting some more interesting versions. I really love it when my favorite sports team wins. I heard a really good one yesterday for the first time. I love Shadow IT. Who was in that session? Anyone remember that session? What's another one? Clive, what's another one?
His name was Love.
His name was Love. Anyone else got a favorite love? Yes.
The score of the match was 40-love.
40 love. That's right, in tennis. Philip, you got one?
I might have some love handles.
Love handles. Yes, I like that. That's good. Any more loves? Jordan Love. Here's my other favorite is, I love a bone-in, dry-aged ribeye with portobello mushrooms and a nice California Cabernet. Now, we all know we don't love a steak the same way we love our spouse. Now, I will leave it up to you which one you like more or less. But it's very complicated, right? It's very, very complicated. Interestingly, the Greek had this figured out thousands of years ago. They used to have 8 different words for the word love. The Greek word for a familiar love, a love that you would have for a family member, was the word philia. Now, does anyone know what city in the United States gets its name from that word? Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. So the Greek had this figured out. I wanted to do one more example, though, just to kind of how we deal with semantics. And this one's much more personal and timely. I recently received a promotion. And my boss said to me, that was a while ago, Greg. My boss said to me, Stephen, congratulations. We're promoting you, and you have a new title. I'm like, oh, okay. Your new title is Principal Account Manager. And I've been doing this IT thing for a while. I hadn't heard that title before. I was like, principal? What, I'm running a school? I have a bunch of kids I deal with? They're brats? They're throwing temper tantrums? They don't want to do the, oh wait, this does sound like my job. No, it was the different spelling of principal. And I don't know, it just didn't land with me very well, and I didn't quite understand the title. Until a few weeks later, I took my dog to the vet. Hopefully one or two have animals out there, but when you take your animal to the vet, it's much like a human being. There's an examination room. And inevitably, in that examination room, there will be some charts and things you can look at while you're waiting for the doctor to come in. It's just like, if you're going to see a medical doctor. And in that chart, they had one that had on the left-hand column, it was the age of your dog, and on the other column was the weight. And you look at the two, and you say, okay, based on that intersection, that matrix, this is the lifestyle stage of your dog. So it was like baby, toddler, adolescent, adult, senior. Oh, wait, I was a senior account manager. This is starting to make sense. Does anyone know what the next life cycle stage is for an animal after senior? Geriatric. Now, who in this room would want to do business with a geriatric account manager, right? That would not go over very well. So they said, oh, probably principal makes a lot more sense. So I don't know if that was the reason I'll talk to my boss later if that was the reason why it's a principal and not a geriatric account manager. But those are just some really simple examples of how we deal with semantic challenges on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to walk through this concept a little bit more, talk a little bit more about how we solve those challenges. I'm going to do a demonstration, try to squeeze in 2 demonstrations, and then, as you can tell, feel free to chime in some questions. I hate just listening to myself while I'm up here. Let's get into the content here. You can use knowledge management in a lot of different, I'll say, synonyms here. You can think of this as enterprise search problems. You can think of this as content management problems. Anything where you have a lot of data problems, it will probably have these types of issues associated with it. And I like to use this analogy. Let's say I interviewed for your job, for a job at your company. I might need a new job after this presentation, right? Let's say I interviewed for a job at your company. How did I get through that interviewing process? Well, I was able to have that interviewing process with you because we both spoke the language English. But once I started working for your company, I don't know anything about the acronyms you use. I don't know anything about the terminology you use. I don't know anything about your customer base. That all has to be departed upon me. And we spent a lot of, last couple of days talking about AI. Well, AI is, it has that same problem. So then the question becomes, it's like, well, how do I kind of break through these data silos? And I'm not going to be talking much about AI today. I'm just really going to be focused on semantics and knowledge graphs. And yes, they help the AI story, but I will argue with anybody in the room that unless I get my semantic story straight and my knowledge graph story straight, I'm pretty much doomed to implement an AI story. So how does semantics potentially solve these types of problems? And I'm not going to read through this entire list. You can probably relate to at least one of them in your own practical existence. My personal favorite is the one in the bottom left. How many times have you gone to a website, tried to find something, you couldn't figure it out, so what do? You pick up the phone and you have to talk to a human being who knows less than you do, right? In the industry term, they don't like that. Manning a phone costs a lot of money, so they use this term deflection, right? How many times am I deflecting someone from calling into my call center, right? So there's a great cost savings here. If I can help customers, help constituents find information faster without getting a human being involved, I can really drive down my customer service costs, right? But that's not an easy problem to solve. And if I don't have a good semantic understanding of my business, I can't fix any of these problems. So what do we really mean by semantics? I use this example all the time just to make it super simple. If I say to you all, hey, I went to the store today and I bought an apple, you don't know if I'm talking about this thing or that thing. There isn't enough context in my sentence that can help you understand really what it means. Conversely, if I said, hey, I went to Whole Foods Market today and I bought an apple, you know I'm talking about the fruit. Why? Because Whole Food Markets is a chain of grocery stores. Produce is sold in grocery stores. Apple is a form of produce, therefore Stephen's talking about the piece of fruit. Now those little mental connections you're making in your brain, Whole Foods Market, grocery store sells produce, Apple, type of produce, that's a semantic relationship. Okay, and Semaphore is basically doing the exact same thing, but we're doing it in software. We're helping to understand the content in a semantic relationship so we actually know what's being talked about. What form of the word love are we using here, for example, right? Conversely, if I said, hey, I went to Best Buy today and I bought an apple, then you know I'm talking about the piece of technology computer. And it's the same logical steps that are going on in your head, right? So what do we mean by a taxonomy? I tell people don't overthink this. A taxonomy is just a way to arrange information. Okay, so for example, there is a reason grocery stores do not organize their food alphabetically. You're not going to find a can of soup in the same aisle as a steak, right? Information is organized by a functional or another type of way that makes sense to the business. Now, there isn't a one-size-fits-all for this, but I will say it's basically just common sense. Another form of a great taxonomy is your company's website. Someone put some thought into how to organize the information on your website, it's basically just a taxonomy. So the next time you walk into a retail store, a grocery store, remember this presentation because you're walking inside of taxonomy. And I'm always curious how stores are laid out and if they're quote unquote stored in a smart way. So then what's a knowledge graph? Well, you're probably all familiar with the concept of data silos. That's where I have my independent, isolated data, and it's really hard for me to traverse information from one data silo to the next. I can connect all my data through a knowledge graph, but if I do not understand what that data is, I can't connect it. I can't just draw these lines randomly from one data silo to the next and expect it to magically now make sense. I need to have a very thought out way of connecting them all. That way of connecting them, that definition, is a taxonomy, right? So if I don't have a good taxonomical representation of the information in my business, I'm never going to get to a good knowledge graph. And then if I don't have a good knowledge graph, I'm never going to make it to my AI initiative. So these are really step 1 and step 2 along the AI journey, and having this is a great building block to get you there. So when I do all this, then I start getting something that looks like this, right? This is what I would say a more mature-looking knowledge graph, but you can see how all the data items are related to each other through a taxonomy. So that's kind of how these things build up and how they're connected to each other. So that's kind of the background. Now I wanted to talk a little bit more about how Semaphore helps you do all this. So Semaphore basically provides 3 services to your data, and they are all driven off basically either a taxon. We use the term knowledge model because we just want to have a very generic term. They're either driven off a knowledge model, a taxonomy, an ontology, or it could just be a very simple controlled list of terms. So basically, it provides these 3 services to your data. One, it has an auto classification or tagging service. So you send Semaphore a piece of content, and you say, Semaphore, what is this about? Okay? It's based on the vocabulary that you defined, it will say it is about these things, so it'll return a set of metadata tags to you. Okay? The other thing it does is provide entity extraction capability, which is basically the reverse function, which says, hey, given this document, pull out all the test results, pull out all the person's names, pull out all the dollar values of contracts. Okay, so it's basically the reverse function. And the third piece is data harmonization, which really speaks to how I connect data across my data silos, and I'll give a specific example of that momentarily. So here's an example of our tagging software. On the left-hand side is something called an accident investigation report. Anytime there's a motor vehicle accident in the United States, one of these lovely handwritten notes gets filed. The challenge here is it's written by different people. They use different acronyms. They have different way of describing things. So there's not a lot of useful information in these things. So it's passed through Semaphore, and Semaphore, basically the output that you see are the tags being returned by Semaphore. Now what's really interesting is the items in red are not directly referenced anywhere in the body text of the accident investigation report. So for example, the last sentence reads, was that the accident occurred at mile, 133 on Interstate 60? Okay, well we know from a GeoNames model, basically another taxonomical model, that is Apache Junction. I believe it's actually in Arizona. So now here's the scenario. You have an insurance analyst. They walk up to their content management system. They walk up to their enterprise search tool, and they say, hey, I want to pull all the accident investigation reports from Apache Junction. So I type in the string, Apache Junction. This report gets returned, even though the string literal Apache Junction exists nowhere in the report. That's a very powerful thought, right? Because now I'm getting around that semantic challenge of people using different vocabularies to describe the same thing. How does this all work? Well, basically, Semaphore has 3 modules. It's also how the software is licensed. The first module is a taxonomy management component. So some people will purchase Semaphore and say, hey, I just need to have a better enterprise class taxonomy management tool, and I'm going to use it. And when I say enterprise taxonomy, it's got all the features you'd expect from an enterprise tool. Governance, change control, rollback, all those sort of things. But from there, once I had that taxonomy or taxonomies built, then I, quote unquote, can put them to work by doing various things. How do I put a taxonomy to work? Well, there's primarily two ways. One is I can classify data, provide those tags, which you just saw in the previous slide. And then the third leg of the stool is being able to integrate that taxonomical information into my various applications to be consumed by users. My website, right? I might use Semaphore to manage how my website is organized. And I think the gentleman from infographics made a very good point, right? Is how you potentially talk about your products internally is going to be very different how the marketing team describes them on your website. You basically have two languages, right? But Semaphore can help bridge that, right? Hey, product development talks about products this way. Our marketing team talks about that this way. That's okay. I can use Semaphore to bring those two together. And I don't have to maintain two separate data repositories or two different ways of how I talked about my technology. What do we integrate with? I'll say the typical integrations that we with Semaphore typically follow this kind of, I'll say, mantra. If you've got lots of data and no one can find anything, we're a really good solution in that space, right? I'll go one step further. If you have lots of data, no one can find anything, and you have a very highly specialized vocabulary that you use to talk about that data, we're really good at solving that problem. I've literally have worked with clients that have acronyms to describe acronyms to describe acronyms for their data. Do we have any of those people in the room? Right? Are you familiar with that problem, right? There's no AI model in the world that's going to understand 3 levels of custom acronyms, right? So then the question becomes, how do I solve that piece of the problem? Well, this is a great place for someone to get involved and help understand those relationships inside of your own private data. Now, the other thing I can do is, once I have that, I can drop various GUI widgets inside of my existing applications to basically navigate users faster. So just think websites, right? I'm trying to find something, how's information organized on my websites. I can use various things. And I'll show this in the example, but I think everyone's familiar with the one at about 1 o'clock here, the search as you type feature. And you're probably all familiar with playing around with Google, right? You type in a couple letters. What does Google return? It says, well, based on what you typed, I think you want more information on this. The challenge there is Google is making some pretty massive generalizations about who you are and what your intent is. That's not really the reality in corporate America or inside of government agencies. We actually know a lot about someone's intent by the mere fact of the application they're accessing. For example, let's say you have a finance application inside your organization, and let's say you have a research and development application inside your organization. I guarantee you a user going onto the finance system is not asking questions about research and development. So I can use something about the known intent of that application, that domain space, to help drive the customer interaction. The really quick way of saying all this is I can help people find information faster. That's really what it gets down to, and to basically help people get to the information that they're trying to locate. And we'll do a quick demo of this. From an architectural perspective, and this is where we kind of break down that data silo problem, is I can now start thinking about my data repositories at a semantic level. What does that mean? The example I like here is, think of the concept Social Security number. How many different ways can we store the concept or represent the concept of Social Security number? Well, in one database, it might be EIN, Employee Identification Number. In another database, it could be TIN, Taxpayer Identification Number. In your human resources file, stored in a PDF, it's stored as social space, it's spelled out, social space security number. It's all talking about the same concept. But because it's represented slightly different at the data level, you get all these crisscross lines between your application, right? So ultimately what happens is how one application references the concept social security number at one database might be completely different how it references the concept of social security number at a different database. So you get all these crisscross lines, right? With Semaphore, that all goes away, and I now build a semantic layer to my data. So now the calling application says, I want the concept of social security number from database 123. Well, in database 123, it's stored as TIN, but that is a level of granularity the calling application doesn't need to know about, which is a very powerful thought, right? Because now you can have application developers and business owners basically talking the same speak, right? I don't have to do a data level translation of that information. I can just say, I want this application to pull this type of information. Well, if I have a semantic understanding of my data, then I don't need to know the granular, oh, here's the exact SQL query I need in order to pull that information. Let's get into some demonstrations. Any questions before I jump into that? Okay.
Who's the end user for these things?
What was that?
Who's the end user that you normally engage with in the business?
Your end user or my end user? I'm normally, when I talk to a client, I'll say it's the CIO or someone under the CIO or CDO tree or the enterprise architect. That's who I'm normally talking to. Then the question becomes, who are their customers, right? You know, it's the business users, it's the applications users, it's the end commuter. So you're helping them to help their own customers, if you will, internally. So I have two demonstrations. One is taken from NASA and space missions. The scenario here is we had a bunch of old engineers retiring, and we had a bunch of new engineers coming in, and they were using a different language to talk about the same thing. And then how do we solve that problem? The second demonstration is SEC 10K filings, which is, hey, I've got all these PDF documents that are unstructured documents, and I want to be able to do a structured analysis on that. So I use this example sometimes. It took me a while to wrap my own head around it. Imagine pointing a pivot table at a content management system. A lot of people are like, well, what the heck are you talking about? You can't point a pivot table at a content management system. I need everything's in rows and columns if I'm using a pivot table. Well, with Semaphore, no, I can actually point a pivot table to a content management system and do the type of BI analysis I would on unstructured data the same way that I could structured. So we're going to go through those two examples inside of the demonstration. Oh, it's not a question. So when you log into Semaphore, this is the home screen. So it starts with the three modules I just got done describing. The module, the data modeling module, the classification module, and also the integration module. So I'm going to actually start with the integration module because this is what your end users would talk about, right, or would actually see, or how they would interact with Semaphore. Now, a lot of times, end users don't even know Semaphore exists because it's so tightly integrated into the application. All they know is their user experience got better, right? That was the outcome. My user experience got better. So the example I'm going to do here is the search as you type feature. I'm going to log into that one. And again, this demonstration is based around manned space missions, right? So we have the new engineer coming in and says, hey, I want to learn more about that thing that ran around on the surface of the moon. Well, that's called a moon buggy, because that's the new engineer's term for that thing that ran around the surface of the moon. Well, that is not the official NASA term for it. The official NASA term is a lunar roving vehicle. Now, number of people who knows that off the street are about 0, right? But that's the official term. So if you went and did a search on moon buggy, you're going to get information about moon phases, maybe about Ford motor cars, but you're certainly not going to get any information about lunar roving vehicles. But the whole idea here is because I have a knowledge graph behind my data store and I understand what that information is, I can help the user get to the right information just one click, okay? So that's kind of, I'll say, what it looks like downstream. So how did that happen? How did we make that mapping? If I can get to it. Okay. So here's Semaphore. So this is actually the modeling tool. If anyone's familiar with Protégé, Semaphore's got a much simpler user interface to use. The idea with Semaphore has always been basically putting model management, model building into the hands of the layperson, into the subject matter expert. I shouldn't have to be an ontologist, a taxonomist, or an information scientist by education to be able to use this tool. Why is that so important? Because the knowledge of your organization is locked up in your subject matter experts' heads. And I need to be able to get it out, and they need to be able to interact with a tool that makes sense to them and can be used fairly intuitively. So I'm going to type in well, if I had it selected. There we go. Type in moon buggy, and it says, oh, you really meant the concept of lunar roving vehicle. Now, what you see here are all the relationships that I've defined as a subject matter expert of what a lunar roving vehicle is. And again, this is going to be domain specific. It's going to be use case specific. There isn't necessarily one size all that fits for this. LLMs are great for helping this. We actually have a plugin now that you can add the LLM of your choice inside this tool to help you build out this logic. So we have actually embraced AI inside of this tool as well, too. Two, we always recommend having some human in the loop. But what you can see is there's an alternative label or synonym for moon buggy. So that was pretty straightforward, making that mapping there. But I can also look at this as a visual as well, too. And I think people just kind of relate to this a lot easier. And you can even publish these models out just for your own people to use and understand, how is my data related, right? Oh, I see that the lunar roving vehicle was used on 3 different Apollo missions. Oh, Apollo 15, oh, that's interesting. I want to learn more about that. I can just click on that and get more information about that, too. Who are the astronauts that were on the Apollo 15 mission? And I can navigate my data in that fashion as well, too. So that was one example of basically how I took an old term, mapped it to a new term, but now I'm going to do a little bit more sophisticated one, which is through document classification. So what we have here is the Wikipedia article to the Apollo 11 space mission. However, we removed the string literal Apollo 11. So Apollo 11 is never actually referenced directly inside this document, okay? If I send that document to Semaphore, give me a moment here. Of course, the zoom bar always gets in your way, right? So just to let you know what I'm doing here is all of Semaphore's integrations are predominantly done through API, right? So you wouldn't, I mean, I'm not very good at reading JSON or XML messages. I don't know about any of you, but not really good at that. So typically everything's integrated through an API. We have a set of tools, however, that basically allows you, as a subject matter expert, to look at what's going on behind the scenes, right? So this is basically just a graphical user interface to our API. So what are you seeing here? Well, on the left-hand side is the document that was sent to Semaphore and how it was being interpreted. And then on the right-hand side are the tags that are being returned. So you can kind of think left side of the screen input, right hand of the side is output. And if I filter, just to make this a little less noisy, on mission, I'm also going to do document type, you will see that Semaphore came back and said, even though you didn't literally see the string Apollo 11 anywhere inside that document, I'm coming back with a pretty high confidence score that this document is indeed about the Apollo 11 space mission. Well, how did it do that? Well, I can actually click on anything on the left-hand side and basically ask Semaphore the question, how did you come to that conclusion? It came to that conclusion because it found enough evidence inside that document to say it was linked to the Apollo 11 space mission. It found the names of all the astronauts. It found the name of the rocket that was used on Apollo 11. It found the name of the landing site that was used on the Apollo 11 mission. So basically, on all this information that it found, it was able to say with a pretty high level of certainty, this document is indeed about the Apollo. So this goes back to the example I did before with Apache Junction, right? The string literal Apache Junction didn't exist anywhere, but I was able to semantically tag that document because I knew enough about either a geonames model or some other information that I could apply that to it. So I'm going to transition now over into the second demonstration and just kind of remember what that one was about. I have a bunch of 10K filing documents. They're all PDFs. And I basically want to be able to do some analysis on them inside of a pivot table, right? So I'm going to basically use a pivot table and analyze PDF documents. That seems kind of odd, but we're going to get there and show you how we did it. Now, another use case for Semaphore that I wanted to point out before switching over to that demo was this concept of document fingerprinting, which I assume you're probably all familiar with. This is another feature of Semaphore. I can actually use Semaphore to identify what type of documents this is. So for example, Semaphore's labeled this as a space document type, right? That doesn't really have an industry standard, if you will, so we just kind of came up with that name. So this is a space document. If I go over and I take a look at a 10K document, and I'm not going to make any changes to the configuration of Semaphore. It's going to say, when I run this document through Semaphore, it's going to say, oh, I know what document type this is as well, too. So think of, you have inbound emails. This is going to be used on any content type. Inbound emails, any type of Word document, any type of PDF doc, chat information. What is this person actually talking about? Oh, I can use Semaphore as a quick way to direct that. Oh, well, that was a customer service inquiry. That was a shipping inquiry. And I can basically do automated routing, if you think of it in those terms, through this type of document or message fingerprinting. So I'm going to take that document. Now, this demo is running on my laptop, which is oh, see, I knew that was going to happen. Well, you're going to have to bear with me while I reprocess this document. So I'm going to resend this document now, again, to Semaphore to say, hey, what is this document actually about? One of the things that Semaphore can also do while we're waiting for this to run is, I mentioned it a little bit, Semaphore can also pick out things that aren't explicitly modeled. So for example, people, locations, organizations, things like that. If you can, I think all those various, I'll say, permutations of, we would call them noun phrases. Semaphore can identify those without them explicitly modeled. Why is that helpful? Well, maybe, you maybe don't want to model everybody in your organization. You wouldn't want to do that. But you can also use that to find candidate terms. Semaphore can say, hey, did you know you had these 12 noun phrases and they're not in your taxonomy? You may want to think about adding them to your taxonomy. So it's actually a way that Semaphore can help you identify terms that you potentially should be adding to your taxonomy. So again, on the left-hand side, you see the information as it was read by Semaphore. On the right-hand side, you see basically the output tags. Now, what's very interesting in this is that inside the 10K filing document, there's absolutely no reference to market capitalization, at least not that literal string, market capitalization, right? So again, the use case here is I'm trying to dissect a bunch of PDF documents to figure out market capitalization and some other factors, right? So, but Semaphore knows, through our subject matter experts, that a form of market capitalization is stock or common stock, right? So if I see a phrase somewhere in this document that talks about common stock, I know that's related to the broader concept of market capitalization, and that's how Semaphore is able to figure out inside this document the market capitalization is a $1.4 billion figure, whatnot, right? But the other thing I wanted to point out too here is you can see that the document type, again, with no changes to how Semaphore was configured, can also come back and say, hey, the last document was about space missions, And I'm using the same model now to say, here's another document that's about 10K filing documents. So just another way that we can potentially use Semaphore to analyze our information and do it. So if you imagine, therefore, you have a bunch of these 10K filing documents, I pull out this various information, I can then represent this information inside of a pivot table, right? So I just ran one of the PDF documents through Semaphore, but you could throw as many of it as you want, and it'll be able to extract out these facts for you, these levels of information, and then I can do all the types of data analysis that I'm used to doing on structured data on my unstructured document set. So that's another way, another use case that you can use Semaphore in your own environment. Any questions on the demonstrations? I know I kind of hit on a lot of topics there. All right. So that was actually the last slide that I had. So we just had some time for Q&A. Did I stimulate anyone's thought process? Yeah, did it? Okay, you saw it. See, they're paying attention. At least 2 people are paying attention in this room. I don't know about anybody else. Questions, comments, witty criticisms?
So in the end, you did not get promoted?
No, I did get promoted. I actually did get promoted. Now, like I said, I just. How many times in your life has said, "Hey, congratulations"? What's your name? John. You have a new title. It just takes you a little bit surprise, and I just had to wrap my head around that a little bit. No, I'm now a principal account manager. Not a geriatric. That's the most important thing. I'm not a geriatric account manager.
A quick question. So
yes.
How do you handle conflicting concepts? So like love hurts?
So Semaphore does not restrict you from a English language perspective. You could have 5 concepts called love. They're all called love. But how you define the relationships is what makes them unique. So you could have multiple ways of, people say, say that all, they don't say they say it all the time, but is how do you deconflict them? So maybe you would say, one love could be in the reference of tennis. You would have another love defined in the reference of another area, and that's how we're allowed to have multiple, basically we call them preferred labels, but it's basically a way of having this one string or multiple strings say the same thing. Good question, though. Any other questions?
So this is one way then of providing that kind of context about the data to the AI, right? Is that how you?
Yeah. So I did not mention LLM at all, did I, in my presentation? That was actually on purpose. Figured you guys heard enough about AI over the last day and a half. No. So another question we get a lot of times, like, well, how many documents do you need to train Semaphore? 0. This isn't a machine learning platform. This is a semantic data platform. So how does that help with your AI strategy? I've done another webinar where I talk just about that specific use case, right? So and hopefully it came out in the course of this day, is if you don't have a semantic understanding of your data, I, as that new employee, right, the example that I gave at the beginning, if I don't have a semantic understanding of your business, I don't know anything. LLMs are exactly the same way, right? If you don't provide the LLM as part of the token window, a semantic understanding of the data that's interpreting, you're going to get bad results. The 2 ladies from AbbVie who presented yesterday, if you were in that session, showed a great example of that. Here's what happens when I go from a generic LLM approach to an LMM approach with a semantic. They said semantic, right? Underneath the covers there, Semaphore was being used, but they used the term semantic, a semantic RAG approach. How do I get to a semantic RAG approach? Is I need to have a tool like Semaphore to be able to provide that context. Anything else? Other questions?
How do you scale that to the taxonomy of all the domains? I mean, I could see, you did talk about generative AI as a way to automate that taxonomy generation, but if your domains are vast, how do you do that?
It's a great question. And here's the best advice I'm going to give you on that one: don't boil the ocean. Right? So, and one step further in that is pick a specific use case or problem, and I think this dovetails into the gentleman from infographics, right? Find something I can show quick business value out of, right? And then from that particular use case, work backwards to the piece of the model you need to develop in order to support that use case. Do not start with, I'm going to model everything in my organization, and I'm going to provide absolutely no business value to anyone until I have everything modeled. Well, guess what's going to happen? Your project's going, the funding for your project's going to get pulled. We need to return business value quickly. How do we do that? Minimal viable product. Let's start with a small model. And then you'll also find people will then come, right? They'll see success with one project, and they'll want to be involved with a larger one.
And
Great
actually,
question, though. Thank you.
But that is, so what you say is right.
In terms of winning business, all
Yep.
right? MVP all the way, right? It's about shrinking it. It's becoming, creating decisive competitive advantage in a more narrow space. But the product itself, right?
Yeah.
Your strongest suit is the ability to traverse these domains because of schema agnosticism, right? You can have multiple schemas.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so you can occupy a solution space that others can't because of their inability to traverse. But I just want to know how to accelerate it.
I would say, let's say you came on and said, hey, Stephen, we want to start a Semaphore-centric project with you. Whether you use a consultant like David, you use one of your own internal consultants, and when I say consultants, I mean an information science consultant. The first step in that process will typically be, what do you currently have? You probably have a lot more things that look like taxonomies than you really think. You've probably done a lot of it already. I've talked to some very large, I'm not kidding, Fortune 100 companies, and I asked them, well, how do you manage your vocabularies right now? Guess what they say? Excel and Google Sheets. That's how they do it, right? So then, great, let's get you out of Excel and Google Sheets. Let's get you into a enterprise-grade governance tool. And guess what? You've already done 80, 90% of the work for that first use case or multiple use cases.
I'll disclose to you what the problem set is. All right, it's not the whole.
What is it?
It's not the whole ocean that I need to boil, but I have 3 large lakes, all right, 3 domains, right?
Yep.
That are all subsumed by the information sphere. The domain of cyber warfare, the domain of electromagnetic warfare, and the domain of cognitive warfare. Of the 3, cyber's the straightforward one, right?
You're the domain expert, so I would ask you.
And so having won the competition and expect to start cyber phase 1, in a couple months, I said, I don't even know if I can put my finger on enough subject matter expertise
to even
explain
start
phenomena in the electromagnetic sphere, right?
Yeah. I will not discount, and you've probably heard this in other sessions, we are always believe in the human in the loop, right? So yes, you're always going to need that domain expertise. I'm not going to say here, oh, Semaphore is just going to magically build models for you. Do we have tools to help you build models? Absolutely. But you're still going to, I'm going to rewind a little bit to a comment that I made earlier, which is we try to put Semaphore in the hands of the layperson so that you can give it to a subject matter expert and they can add to it without them being an information scientist, right? But that's, I think, you look at a project as people, process, and technology. I can help you with the process, I can help you with the technology. To a certain extent, I can help you with the people, but then you need to bring your own domain expertise to the table.
The other way around, you could be cost prohibitive.
Yes, absolutely.
The way it is now, it's not cost prohibitive, it's just really hard to fund.
It's hard to find. Yeah.
Is this working? Yes, sir. So I maybe building off what this gentleman was speaking to. So yeah, understanding what your vocabulary is, what your business's language is, that's one thing, and that's critical. And you probably have more than you think you do. I think it could also maybe be a little daunting to sort of, like you were showing these demonstrations, I've seen some of this stuff before, and it's brilliant, but like, how did the model come together to give you this great analysis and this great insight into the content that you were dropping in the classifier? And I think sometimes maybe it can be a little daunting to kind of make that first leap of, how do I get to the best possible model to solve even the small problem that you were describing? Like, what are some best practices and suggestions for making that leap?
So again, I would start with the end in mind. Put your consultant hat on, right? What's the one business case or government agency case that I'm trying to solve, right? There's got to be content that already exists in that domain. So I'm sure somewhere along the way, someone's written something about that information space, right? One of the features of Semaphore is a text miner, right? I can send all that content to Semaphore, and someone will say, hey, here's 20 terms I found in your document corpus that's not in your taxonomy. That's a great place to start, right? What are the existing noun phrases inside of in your domain space already? And that's a really good place to start with it. Is it going to replace your subject matter experts? Absolutely not. But we do provide, I'll say, some tools to help you get there. Other questions? Thank you. I appreciate it. You're a great audience.